welcome to our second installment of the unit matrix for World War II. So the other day we looked at the road to war and some of the main battles. Now let's move to the Battle of the Atlantic and the home front. So the first thing you have to know about the Battle of the Atlantic is that it was the convoy system going from Canada across to Britain to supply it for the war effort. The Battle of the Atlantic was of crucial importance because it supplied Britain for the war. If they didn't get supplies, they would not have lasted against the Nazis. One of the main ships used by the Canadian Navy was the corvette. It was a very cheap, not very well built boat, and what we did is we sacrificed quantity for quality. So instead of building 3 or 4 great destroyers, we built constant corvettes that could be torpedoed, and we just have another one coming out of Halifax. And it was a campaign against the German U-boats. Convoy systems were a way better way to approach shipping because you sent hundreds of boats across the Atlantic, and they could protect themselves better against German U-boats. So what's going on? We looked at the war front. What's going on at the home front? Well, in the 1930s, this beaver, which symbolizes Canada, Canada was very isolationist because they were in a Great Depression. Why would we get involved in other people's affairs or other countries' affairs when we could barely deal with our own problems? But by the 1940s, they actually want jobs. They want to help in this war. We're going to get involved. One of the issues with a nation that's in depression is they're usually quite racist, right? They want to blame foreigners for all the economic problems. So Canada itself was quite anti-Semitic, not just Germany. And at one point the SS St. Louis, a boat full of Jewish refugees, I believe around 800 or so, came to Canada, or was it 907, came to Canada. And one of the quotes that one of our ministers, I believe it was the Prime Minister, said was, no, it wasn't the Prime Minister. And one of the quotes of one of our politicians was, how many Jews is enough? Well, none is too many. So they want help. The SS St. Louis has to go back to Germany, and most on board died in concentration and death camps as a result. So it's quite a shameful moment in our past as Canadians. Now, war breaks out when Hitler invades Poland on September 3rd, but Canada, we wait 1 week. And why we do that is we want to show Britain that we're actually more independent. We are going to debate whether or not to go to the war in Parliament, and Prime Minister King is totally for the war, and we do decide to go to the war to help the Commonwealth. But French people, symbolized by this picture, say, as long as there's no conscription. We don't want conscription to happen, and King, of course, promises there won't be any. Later on, he's going to actually renegotiate that promise through a plebiscite where most of Canada is going to agree that, yes, he can have conscription, about 75%, but most Quebecers at 72% say no, they don't want conscription. Now, King says, I want to be happy. So in order to be happy, I don't want Canadians to die in this war. So at first he says, let's just involve ourselves in the British Commonwealth Air Training Program. We're going to train pilots from all over the Commonwealth in Canada where it's safe to do so and send them to the war that way. It'll be way better for Canada. And it was located in Canada and required few men. At the same time, our Minister of Munitions and Supply, C.D. Howe, is saying, let her rip, let's go to war, let's do a good job. He's almost the complete opposite of our Minister of Munitions, Sam Hughes, during World War I, who makes those crappy products, and he's involved in profiteering. So one thing that we want to look at is the term total war. And Sam Hughes understands, C.D. Howe understands that total war is when you mobilize all your resources for war. And that even involves women like Rosie the Riveter, who are going to go to work. They're going to drop their kids off at daycare and go make bombs and guns, etc. In total war, every single factory, every single person is mobilized for the war effort. And the other day we forgot to look at Dieppe, but you'll be responsible for knowing some positives and negatives about the Dieppe raid from your notes. Now, how do we pay for this war? Well, the government does borrow some old tricks from World War I, and they say, let's have war bonds again, let's offer those to the people, and that's where you loan the government money, and they give you interest back later on. War stamps, income tax, inflation happens again, and on our home front notes we looked at that. And during inflation, what we do is we have rations, we have wage freezes and price controls to help control inflation so that even if you're making lots of money, you don't have to spend a lot to buy things. For instance, if everybody made $100 an hour in Canada, chocolate bars would cost quite a great deal more. There's also huge social change that results from the war. Now Canada is more of a welfare state. We're going to take care of people from the cradle to the grave. And that means that the Canadian government's going to basically take care of you from being a baby all the way to you die. There's going to be social security, there's pensions, there's child bonuses. And we really change and say we've got to do something different. One of the negative social changes is the internment of the Japanese. Once the invasion of Pearl Harbor happens, all the way up here, the Japanese government looks and says, these Japanese people living in Canada are probably spies, even though the RCMP and the military said these people aren't a threat at all. The Canadian government moves them from the coast, where they're easily accessible to other Japanese people from Japan, or maybe secret messages, and moves them inland to a place called New Denver. A couple of long-lasting effects economically and socially on Canada are the fact that our gross domestic product increases exponentially, and that's the total monetary value of all the goods and services produced in our country. Because of the war, we're making lots of products, we're selling lots of products, Canada is becoming rich. Another thing is we become more union friendly. C.D. Howe realizes he's going to have to give the right to unions. He's going to have to give workers the right to unions and give workers the right to the right to strike. He's going to have to give them higher wages if he wants to win this war. Canada's also now got modern factories and industry. And the National Resources Mobilization Act, the NRMA, which you're going to have to know, makes it mandatory for people to work in Canada. So conscription initially happens for workers, and these workers that are conscripted for the home front are called zombies. Eventually, the National Resources Mobilization Act makes conscription mandatory for military service as well. King's famous quote is, "Conscription if necessary, but not necessarily conscription." In fact, conscription is end up deemed being necessary, and in April 1942, there was a big vote, except for the Quebecers, like I said, as to whether conscription is going to be allowed. By 1944, 2,643 conscripts actually make it to the front, and there's riots in Montreal and BC because people are pacifists and they don't see this as their war. And that is the end of our unit on World War II.